Name and birth date.
My name is William F. MacKenzie, William Forrester MacKenzie, actually. I was born September 2nd, 1918 in Beverly, Massachusetts. And this is the house that I moved to when I was 4.5 years old and lived here until I got married. I have many fond memories of this area. And
what are some of your earliest memories? We'll start out with some of your earliest memories of kids in the house.
The day that I moved in, the earliest memories of a big truck backing up and with a moving van and moving the furniture from where we'd moved to in Beverly to this house, which we had, my father had purchased a month before. I can remember my dog Scrappy. He used to, when I was going with my wife who lived in Beverly Cove, Scrappy the dog used to, hound dog, used to get on the bus with me and ride down to Charnock Street in Beverly. And after a while, the dog got so attached to him down to my wife's parents' house that he'd go out and the bus driver got to know him and he'd go out and stand by the stop and he'd hop on the bus and ride down all alone, a distance of probably 4 or 5 miles, and they get off the bus and walk down through the cemetery down to Beverly Cove where they used to live. And he was a real smart dog. We had him till, quite a few years after Dave and Susan were small. He was still around.
Oh, you still had, what kind of dog?
He was a cross between a foxhound and a beagle.
And a house, or?
It was always a big time at both Thanksgiving and Christmas. My older brother and his family would come, and for a while during the Depression, my oldest sister, Marion, and her husband had been in Florida and work got shot, and they came up and stayed with us for about a year. Oh. First memories of the garage here were coming back from Maine. My father and my brother used to go down. I was too young to hunt, and they'd bring back, they were allowed 2 deer each, and they'd bring back 4 deer. And for a while, they used to send 2 of them into Boston and keep 2 because 4 were too much. Send them into Bachelor and Door in Boston, and they used to sell the deer meat, and then it became illegal.
Oh, okay.
To sell a deer meat.
Yeah.
And but I can remember 4 deer hanging in the garage here and cutting them up. And I think this is one of the things that got me so interested in hunting.
Hunting, oh. Yeah. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Wilbur was the oldest, and Marion was next, and Gladys was the next, and Bertha, and then Fred and myself.
Mm-hmm. Were you?
I was the
youngest. A lot younger than.
Well, my brother Wilbur was 19 years older than I was.
Oh, wow.
And my sister Marion was 17 or 18 years older than I was. And Gladys was about 15, and Bertha was about 12 years, and my brother Fred was 6 years older than I was.
Oh, okay. So you were really much younger.
Wilbur would be, if he was alive today, would be, 92, 94, going on 95 years old. And my sister Marion died last year, and she was 92 at the time. So Gladys died much younger. She was 87, I think, at the time she died. And my sister Bertha was in her 50s. And of course, my brother Wilbur was in his 50s when he died too.
What do you remember about growing up in the house?
I can look upstairs and see the back windows. That used to be my bedroom.
Oh,
Up there.
okay.
And the big, and it was beautiful waking up in the morning, the sunlight coming in. Of course, this house wasn't across over here. It was just a garage at the time. And that was Crotty's house. And the houses up there have all been added on since. And I noticed some houses over and back, but it's sure changed.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So these were fields, farms, or fields?
Fields, mostly. Fields. And you can look up the end of the street and see a house at the end of the road up there. And that used to be the area I used to trap and go skating when I was a kid. But I noticed there's a house built right what was the pond at that time.
Oh, okay.
So they must have filled it in, yeah. And that was where Mr. Parmento lived that gave us the dog that Scrappy, yeah. Uh-huh. So.
What about other childhood memories? What was school like? Where did you go to school?
I went to school at the Ryleside School. That's Giles Avenue right over there. And all we did was go out and go down Giles Avenue and go up and turn to the left, and that was a school. It was probably less than a quarter of a mile.
Mm-hmm. Big school or small?
No, it was a big school. I believe it's a condominium now.
Oh, well, you said with the deer you couldn't use all the meat. Did you have a refrigerator? Did you have? I think the kids would be interested.
You could either jar the meat. We didn't have freezers. We used to jar some of the meat, but the rest of it we used to have to eat up. And if the weather was warm in November when they would come back with a deer, you had to eat fast.
Did you kept some in an ice box, or what did you have?
Oh, we kept it refrigerated. We used to, if it was cold enough, my father used to go down around the middle of November, and it used to get pretty cold. And I can remember times when the deer legs were hanging out here in the garage, and it would come out and they'd be frozen. You'd have to really take a saw to get into the meat. But the winters were much colder then. I can remember with the snow plows going up through here, old tractor plows, and the horse, and they would plow the sidewalks with a horse plow over across the street here.
We went down to Ryleside. Where did that name come from?
Well, originally it was Royal Side, and I don't know why, but somebody figured there was nothing royal about the Ryleside, and they changed the name to R-Y-A-L, Ryleside. And that was the name for a good many years, and all of a sudden some of them, and even some of the ads in the paper, especially on real estate, will say R-I-A-L, so I don't know where that come from, but it has been used, but actually the right spelling is R-Y. They dropped the O out of Royal, and it's Ryleside.
Make sure, look towards Dave, name and birth date and where you were born.
Okay, my name was Eleanor Robertson, and now it's Eleanor Robertson MacKenzie, date of birth January 20th, 1918. And this is the house where my grandmother and grandfather lived when I was a little girl. I lived across the street in a two-family house. We lived upstairs. And all of my, my brother and two of my sisters were born while we still lived over there. Then our family got real big, and there were only two of them, so we swapped. And they lived across the street, and we lived in this house for a year. And that's when the fire happened. They moved back in here, and we moved down to the Cove, and that was how we happened to move away from Dodgers Row.
What do you remember? How old were you when the fire happened, and what do you remember?
10. I was in school. I remember coming home on the bus and hearing that there was a fire on Dodgers Row, and coming home to find out that it was a big fire. The barn was gone, the house was mostly gone, everything was wrecked. And I was 10.
I remember Grandma talking about that. Oh, what are your mother and father's names?
Hazel Dodge Robertson and John Robertson.
on Robertson. And this Dodge's Row, I've always wondered what the meaning of Dodge's Row. And
well, my grandfather's ancestors were given the land from the king way back at the beginning. Mm-hmm. There were two brothers that were given a lot of land here in North Beverly. And part of it, I can even remember when it had never been deeded. It was just handed from the father to the oldest son all the way from the 1600s. And my grandfather had it. And then we had the Depression and times got bad, and eventually he was trying to get a mortgage on his property to get up some cash, and the bank made him deed the land, which was the first time it had ever been written on a deed, and was held legally. Before that, it was just father give it to the son, and he was the oldest boy in the family. He had a brother that lived up on the hill up there, and a sister who shared this house with them. When we lived across the street, Aunt Belle lived on the first floor, we lived on the second floor. Then she moved back over here with them, and that front bedroom was her room.
Oh, okay. What was it like in this area? The other house was over here, and then
yeah, quite
the
a
barn?
way back from the road, and a great big barn, and a fenced-in area where the cows went out and wandered. Right up there. Mm-hmm. Is where the land was that I did. This was all farmland and cows, and
all these no houses here or out
that
back.
Third one up was there. That's where my Uncle Harold lived, my mother's brother.
Oh, okay.
And he lived there with Sarah and the two children, Leslie and Priscilla. And then there was a big field over across the street that was called the root garden, because that's where they raised beets and carrots and parsnips. So I remember one day my grandfather said, that's 5 acres. And since then, that's always been my measure of how big a piece of property was.
Oh, for 5 acres.
Whether it was or not, that's what I believed. Down and back here, there was an enormous orchard. They raised apples. My grandfather set off with the wagon and the horse-drawn and went down and sold to various places down to downtown Beverly. And then finally, when he had a really big crop, he'd go across the bridge to Salem and sell over at the open market over there. And then he also had dairy cows and had a milk route, which I got to go quite often with him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I remember you talking. You had a real special relationship with him.
Oh, yes, I did. Yeah, real close.
You were the oldest?
Oldest. Well, no, my cousin Leslie was 5 months older, so I was the oldest.
Okay, but in your family, what were the age? How?
My family, I'm the oldest. Jean, then Fred, who died, and Elsie. And then after we moved to the Cove, Marion was. She's 11 years younger than I am.
Oh, okay. So the only son, the only boy, died of...
He was in World War II. It was a airplane pilot, instructor. And then when he came back, he and another friend had started a business flying sportsmen into northern Maine, up to fish and hunt and everything.
What kind of planes?
They had some little seaplane landed on ponds and lakes and things. They had a crash. Nobody got hurt, but it ruined the business. And then I forget where he went to work, but in 1949 he died of polio very, very quickly. He was over at Tobacco Lake camping with his wife and their little boy and got sick, went into the hospital, and in 5 days he was dead. So, and that was 49. He would have been in his 20s still.
Wow.
For a few months, and then my mother and dad bought this house and we moved here in 1929. And I changed schools. Got used to a completely different way of life. Beverly Cove was very different than North Beverly.
How?
And, well, closer to downtown, near the beaches. More city.
Okay.
Dodge's Row was really, really country. And whole new set of friends. And I think I look back on Dodgers Row as being the best part.
Oh, okay, where you really enjoyed it. You had a close relationship with your grandparents there.
Very close.
And your grandfather. Oh, we were going to talk about going out with him when he delivered milk.
Yes, yeah, that was one of the things I used to do. Was he had a horse and a wagon, and they'd bottle the milk. They had a great big cooler, and the milk ran down over the sides of the cooler and then into the bottles, and they capped them. And then every day he went out and delivered milk to his route all over North Beverly. And then later, when the Board of Health put through laws, it had to be pasteurized. So then you went down to another place where they had a pasteurizing plant, got the milk, and then took it and delivered it to the houses. I can't remember. I think he did that all his life. I can't remember his ever stopping doing it.
And
A nice, easy distance from North Beverly. You had to go to walk down to the depot and take the trolley car or the bus later and go a fair distance to get to downtown Beverly. But I can remember when it was before we moved here, so I must have been 8 or 9 years old, that my grandfather sent me to do a bank errand for him, which involved walking all the way down to the depot, getting on the trolley, riding down to the center of Beverly, getting off and going to the bank, which is still there. And when I think I had to be under 10 years of age, it was a pretty good errand to be sent on, I think.
Right. Did you do either when you lived on Dodgers Row or here, playing? What kind of games, or did you?
When I first moved here, I went to this Cove School. I can't believe this. They voted me captain of the basketball team. I think because I was the new kid. It sure wasn't because I was any good at sports, but we spent days and days down at the beach, Woodbury's Beach. I don't know how my mother dared to do it, but she let us go down there to the beach. No lifesaver, no anybody keeping an eye on you. Just went down there and learned to swim.
Oh, wow. Difficulties during the Depression, or what was the impact of the Depression on your life?
I don't know. Looking back, it must have been terrible to try to run a household and have such a small income. But we always had enough to eat. We held on to the house. My father had a truck and worked as a plumber, and for his father's business. And we made out. You read about the Depression, and it sounds a lot worse than it was to live through it.
End of the road. That's the fellow that gave us Scrappy. He's also the fellow that told me that I was trapping muskrat just beyond his house up there, and I found a skunk hole, and he told me to set the trap for him because if you caught a skunk in a trap, all you had to do with the skunk, you had to wet on his tail and then throw it. And if you walked around the skunk and grabbed him quick by the tail and held him up, that he couldn't wet on you. And I did. I caught the skunk in the trap. I picked him up. I reached in and grabbed him by the tail and held him up right close to he was right close to my face. And the next thing I knew, it was just like a big fog all around me. And at first I couldn't smell it, but it began to smart, and then I could smell it. And I dropped him and came home, and they could smell me coming down the street. I come to the house, and my mother says, "You can't come in here." They got some hot water and brought it out to the garage here, and they bathed me, and they tried everything, and finally one woman said, "What you got to do is get some Campbell's tomato soup and cover him with it." And they did that, and I looked as though I'd been stabbed to death. Then they washed that off, and it still stunk. And Mrs. Crotty across the street came over and said, the only thing that's going to kill that smell is gasoline. And my mother says, no, I'm not going to soak him in gasoline. And finally, they washed me down 3 or 4 times, and they tried vinegar and everything else. I began to smart, but eventually it did go away, and they let me back in the house. And but the only problem with it was every time it was wet outside, and I'd go out and I'd get a little wet, I'd begin to smell skunk again. So that Mr. Pimenta, I went up and told Mr. Pimenta about it, and I said, that story about picking a skunk up is not so. Well, he says, that's what I'd always been told. And he says, I'm glad to find out. And after that, I never took his word on anything.
I bet.
Okay, so here we are at Woodbury's Beach. After we moved to the Cove when I was 10 years old, I've never been able to understand how my mother could do it, but she used to let us come down here. I couldn't swim. I learned with the other kids. We got so good at it, we used to go out on that point there and dive off that tall rock at high tide. And that was another diving rock at high tide. The water comes in here pretty far when it's in. This is getting fairly low tide now. But that was a complete change in what I'd done for amusement, from being in North Beverly and going once a year and coming down here and going every day. And even after we were married and I had children, I still came to the beach. We lived on Ober Street for a while, and I can remember coming down here to the beach every day. So it was a lot of years of my life that I spent time here on Woodbury's Beach. And further, now they've changed it completely. That used to be a private estate over there. And way back, that's, I think, where the house was that the President Taft used to come and stay in. Oh. Bill was telling me the other day he used to live down here on the water and go up to Myopia to play golf. And they used to go up Dodges Row, right past Dodge Street, in order to get to Wyndham and play golf with the rich people.
Trying to think of other stories. Did you want to tell any stories that you remember from down here?
Sort of all blends together. I haven't got anything. I do remember that rock because that's where my sister Jean went out, swam out, get on top of the rock, dove, and instead of going that way, she went that way, hit the top of her head on the rock. A bunch of young kids here, they rescued her. Someone put her in a cart, dragged her all the way back to the house, and she survived it. These are the kinds of adventures that kids used to seem to have things happen, and mostly turned out okay. I grew up and couldn't imagine letting my kids go to the beach by themselves.
Right.
And then we got to the point where you don't go unless you have a parent and lifeguard at the beach. So things have changed. People used to be more independent and learn to take care of themselves, make mistakes and learn from them, instead of being watched over the way you have to do today. I'm not arguing against watching over kids. I'm in favor of it. But when I think back, we really did have a lot of freedom to do what we wanted to do within limits. And the temptations weren't as great. The dangers weren't as great. And it was a sort of an easier, gentler life for growing up in.
Did you spend a lot of time with your sisters and brother playing, or did you have other friends?
Friends. I had a lot of friends, and still remember them. Ones from North Beverly that I stayed in touch with and saw when we all went to Beverly High School together. Uh-huh. And other friends that I met after I got down here to the Cove. Of course, also we did Girl Scouts.
Oh, were you in
Girl Scouts? That was at the Baptist Church uptown. We did a lot of walking, come to think of it. I lived down here. We go to Girl Scouts. You got yourself there, walked up, walked back. It was, I don't know, 2-3 miles. 4-H club. I belonged to the 4-H club. You had to walk all the way from the Cove to the Washington School, which is down on Rantoul Street. And I went to canning classes.
Canning classes.
Canning classes.
Really?
I learned how to.
Did you enjoy that?
Oh, sure. I did it several summers. That was one of the things that you did. And went and learned how to make jams and jellies and canned vegetables. But there, too, it was a far distance away, and yet we all walked. And there wasn't anybody like all the next generation running around all the time with their cars trying to drop off kids and pick up kids, and you have to do it, but it just seems like it's so different because my activities were done pretty much independently. My mother couldn't drive. She didn't take us anyplace. You just got yourself where you're going, and probably walked a lot of miles in the process.
Over here is where we used to come duck hunting, but the ducks used to fly up the river and quite a ways out, and we couldn't figure how to get them in. And of course this park wasn't here then, and it was entirely different. There was a big drop-off out here, and there used to be a pier, similar to the pier that's down below, that used to go out. So the fellow that I used to hunt with, my age, Tom McDermott, and there was a man named Page that used to have some mallard ducks up in his cages in the backyard, and Tom says, he's working, we'll go down and borrow him borrow the ducks. And he says, we'll use them as decoys. And I said, how are you going to hold them? He says, well, we'll get a good strong twine, a hard string, and we'll tie their legs and we'll tie them to the pier. And I said, okay. So he took 2 of the ducks and I took 2 of the ducks in a bag, and we brought them over here. And they tied the strings on their legs and tied them to the pier, and the water was down and we didn't think much about it. The ducks were squawking and they calling ducks in, heck, thanks for the election. We were doing pretty good. All of a sudden, Tom says, I don't hear the ducks calling anymore. We went out on the pier to look for them, and down about 6 inches, the tide had come in, and down about 6 inches was a duck's head. And he said, what are we going to do? We took them out and tried to revive them, but it was too late. So we put them back in the bags and took them back to Mr. LePage's. He said, we better tell him. Tom says, no, he'll kill us. He said, well, we put the ducks back in a cage. And Mr. Page went out to feed them that night. And he looked and the ducks were dead. He couldn't figure out what happened to them. So as a friend of his was a vet, and he took him down to the vet. And the vet says, well, he drowned. And he says, they couldn't have. It didn't rain that hard today. But we've always I felt bad about it, but I felt that I got talked into
doing something.
Doing something. But
So
I was just
never did tell him about it.
Well, yes, we did. About 2 years later, he kind of suspected what happened. He'd heard that we'd been around there. And I went up to him and told him what had happened. He said, well, I feel better. He says, at least I know I didn't kill him. He says, by leaving him out in that rainstorm.
Family history. I had talked to Grandma about how they ended up in this area. She said that someone once asked Grandpa Dodge, Frederick Dodge, if if his ancestors came over on the Mayflower. And he said no, they had waited until they made sure that they got here all right, and then they came over on the next boat, and it's just about the truth. William and Richard Dodge were brothers, and they came over to the Bay Colony and landed in Salem, and were given a land grant by the King of England for land out by the Great Pond, which is now Wenham Lake. And they came out and settled in this area of Dodge's Row and Dodge Street in Beverly, and the land was passed down father to son and subdivided so that each one of the children got a piece of the land until they all ended up with small lots of land. And in 1947, when Grandpa Dodge wanted some retirement money, he decided to take a mortgage on the property, and it was the first time that the property ever had a deed, because it had been passed father to son all the way down to him, and he finally got a deed for the property in 1947. These tombstones here are the tombstones in the original Dodge burial ground, and they are of William and Richard Dodge and their spouses. As you can see, they're rather worn and weathered, and you can't read them very clearly, but I've been assured that these are the original stones of the first ancestors here in the United States. It's a recast stone. It's the original slate headstone recast in concrete to preserve it. It has a date of 1647 in February of here lies the body of Andrew Dodge with a death angel carved in the top of the slate. This is Hannah Dodge, wife of Andrew Dodge, about the same time period. Can't really make out the date real well. There's another one over here of a hand-carved tombstone of Sarah Dodge. Mr. Benjamin Dodge departed this life February 6, 1810. Behold and see, you that pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me.
I recall it seemed as though my father got up and went off to work every morning, being a plumber. My grandfather was just there all the time. My memory of him is he went to market, but mostly his work was done there, right on the land, and he was around. I know my mother loved living there. Still wishes she could go back. I think of her a lot more as an outdoor type person. She was out in the woods and out in the fields, and not really the house type of person at all. She was just an outdoorsy. She misses it now a lot and wants to see Harold and Rodney and go home. I believe that's where she wants to go back to. I don't think that any place else means as much to her as being able to go back. And I keep thinking, there's no way, it's not there anymore. The people aren't there. But it's nice to have had a childhood that you can look back on. And mine was pretty much the same when I was little until I was 10.
Being outdoors and on the farm.
Yeah.
What do you remember about your fathers, the Robertsons?
They all seemed like very rich people. If we could have, we would have gone down to Lovett Street and seen the house that they lived in. It was beautiful. And then in the summers, they went to the cottage. We went there for the 4th of July every year and had fireworks. We went in August and had my grandfather's birthday party. My father was one of 8 children, and everybody came back for the family get-togethers. Then at Christmas time, there was a big family Christmas party down at Lovett Street, which was very elegant, very big, a winding staircase and a music room and the living room and the big dining room and the big kitchen and all the people. And I was sort of overwhelmed by it all. I had, this very cozy farm-type family that I lived with in this very wealthy, travel to Europe, go visit in Scotland family that just seemed to be very, very prosperous.
Oh, okay. Oh, he came over. How old was he when he came over to?
I think he was 5 when he came over. I'm not sure of that.
Had relatives back there?
Yes, and he used to go back and visit. I've often wished that I could have spent more time talking with him. I think his stories would have been wonderful. And I know he loved Scotland and he loved going back to visit. And when I had Susan, She was his first great-grandchild.
Oh.
And at home, I have a hand-knit woolen baby's wrap that he gave me. Handed it down because this was his first grandchild. And I still have it.
Oh.
I think the sheep were raised on the Shetland Islands and made into yarn and then hand-knit. I have no idea how old it is, but it must be very, very old. So, even though they didn't live very many miles apart, I think my father's family and my mother's family were typical New England and yet very, very different.
But none of them were involved in whaling or any of the...
Not that I ever heard of.
Oh, okay.
No,
So many New Englanders.
just going to the beach. That's the
That
closest we got.
This is the tombstone of Andrew Dodge, who died in 1918, and Frederick Dodge, who died in 1947. Frederick Dodge was our great-grandfather, and Andrew was our great-great-grandfather. And Sarah Beckford Dodge and Minetta R. Trout Dodge, their wives. This is the first registered lot in the Wenham Cemetery. There's an old portion of the cemetery over behind us, but this was the first registered lot when they set this up as a town cemetery. Frederick Dodge, our great-grandfather, was the mayor of Beverly in 1912. And he died in 1947. I can just vaguely remember going down to the farm before he died.
To going down there, and originally we went down for the month of August, and then eventually the whole summer. And even now, when you mention Maine, it kind of perks me up, and I feel as though I get my battery recharged by going down Maine and get feeling good again when I come back.
So it's not only the hunting, it's kind of
It's
the
the people and the
atmosphere.
atmosphere, but there's getting to be fewer and fewer of the people I knew down there that are down there. I still have some, my brother's family down there. Three of his daughters have places down there now, both either Columbia Falls or Columbia. And it's nice to see them when we get down there, but a lot of the younger ones that I was growing up when I was in my, from any time on, from 8 to 9 to 10 and 11 and 12, I knew these people from the summer, and that was when they mostly got out. And a good percentage of them have gone, and it's hard to take.
Yeah, difficult.
Yeah, as Keith and I were talking the other day, he and Erwist and I are about all that's left. Keith's in his 80s, and there was a time when thought somebody that was in their 60s was old, and they thought somebody in their 70s was old. They look young today. And Keith's now in his 80s, and he says I guess he's really getting there, but he doesn't feel it.
Oh, the other thing that we wanted to talk about was the time that you were the selectman in town, and a lot of people wouldn't be clear about what the selectman does.
Well, in a town that has a selectman's form of government, you elect 3 selectmen, in some cases 5 selectmen, and they elect a chairman, and he's the same as the mayor of the town, and anybody that is elected selectman in one of their 3 years will, if there's 3 selectmen, will serve as the chairman, which is the equivalent of the mayor of the town. And some places call them first selectman, second selectman, third selectman. In our town, we just had the 3 selectmen, and they run even the chairman, who was the head of it, can't do anything on his own. It takes the 3 members of the governing body to run the town. You have a town meeting form of government, which all the people that were registered voters are entitled to go to the town meeting, and they vote on every article. You draw up a warrant, and each article has to be in there. We used to even do it with streetlights, and it had to be approved by the people, and then you'd have your orders, and you'd carry them out and carry out any emergencies and set up town meetings that need to be set up.
Oh, okay, so you were selectman in Hamilton for how long?
About 20 years.
Wow.
20 years. I was also on the Board of Personnel Board for another 5 years too, but I have 3. And also as selectman, when I was first selectman, we first as a selectman, we served as Board of Health. And one of us would take chairman of Board of Health, and the other 3 members of the selectmen would be the members of the Board of Health. Board of Public Welfare, and one would take the chairman of the Board of Public Welfare, and the other two members would be members of the Board of Public Welfare at the same time that they were selectmen. So you actually are about everything in town government. It has since been set aside as the Board of Health is a separate Board of Health now, and it's too much of for a selectman to be a selectman and Board of Health and Board of Public Welfare.
Oh, okay.
So we broke them up. The Board of Public Welfare was taken over by the state, and I think it was a lot better when it was handled in the town, because you knew who was on welfare and who needed it, and you had a lot.
Married. Well, we had a little apartment downtown Beverly, and we just lived there a very short time. And then we moved to Broadway and had a nice apartment there. That's where we lived when Susan was born. After that, we moved to Ober Street, and those were the times when we were close to the beach. David was born when we lived there. And then after that, we moved to Wynnum. In Wynnum, we lived on Main Street for a while. Then we moved out to Wynnum Neck. Then we moved into the center of South Hamilton. And I think we have pictures of all of those places.
Oh, okay.
From there, we moved here on Cutler Road. This was the first house that we owned. We lived here from 1949 to 1963. The 3 children mostly grew up here. It's quite a ways from downtown, so they took the bus to school. The woods were here. The boys spent a lot of time playing out in the woods. We went to church up at the Congregational Church at the end of the street, until we later on went to Christ Church downtown. I was a stay-at-home mother, take care of the kids. Our neighbors at that time in the house next door were the Schaefers.
You're real good friends.
Still friendly with them, and they come up from Rhode Island and visit with us and stay once in a while. The house beyond us, for a while, was lived in by Jean and Bob Abbott. She had been married to my brother, and then he died, and then later she married Bob, and they had little girl Janice, who is the same age as must be the same age as Jane. I remember they were children together, babies together.
When you stayed home, what did you do with the kids? What was your week like with the children when they were little?
Well, it was just live out in the country, take care of the kids. We had 1 car, so I didn't go very far during weekdays. And we did that until 1960. That's when David was in college. Susan had just graduated from nursing school. David was going to the University of New Hampshire. And Billy had an opportunity to go up to New Hampshire to prep school. So that's when I went out and got a job. That's when I started working at Salem Hospital. We bought a very old car, and I drove myself back and forth to work, and started in as a secretary in the volunteer office.
Was it difficult to go back to work after those years at home?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, it was a whole different life, and I really liked it a lot. I think during those years, Bill did quite a bit of traveling. I can't remember exactly when, but he went to South America quite a bit, and Kentucky, I think. So I was living my new life with a whole bunch of new friends and things to do, and driving back and forth to Salem every day. And it was totally different. And then we bought the land and moved to Greenbrook Road. So I was here during sort of a transition period. I went from being a stay-at-home mother with 3 kids and having them go through school and get out doing things away from here. And then I started my life of going back to work and having a career, which turned out to be great fun. I worked at the hospital for 23 years.
Oh, but I mean, you changed from a secretary then as you worked. I think you should tell us about that.
Yes, I got to be the director of volunteers and headed the department for 13 years, I think I was director. And I enjoyed it all very much. I think I came at a lucky time because I was able to devote myself 100% to the kids, and I did enjoy that. But I also had an opportunity to go outside the home and have a job and discover myself as another kind of person.
Great. Then what about retirement? How did you make the decision to retire?
Oh, Bill had been so sick, and he was on a medical disability and at home. After he'd spent 2 years by himself, I decided it was time for me to retire and stay home and do things with him. So that was how the decision was made. I also had reached retirement age. So I could do it.
Expected to stay with the company
I expected.
all your career.
Well, my father started in the, it was early 1900s, and they moved here to Beverly, I believe, around early 1902 or 1904, and they continued on, and he worked with them until he died in 1934, 1935. My brother Wilbur worked for him for all of his life. My brother Fred worked for him, and I worked for him, and actually it was a good company to work for, and they treated you well, but they didn't, the last of it, they didn't keep abreast of what they were paying. Everything began to go forward. The rest of the USM was sent overseas to England, and that was the end of the USMC. You go down there today and look at the plant, and you'll see that the windows are all